spring.
All right, it started now.
Okay. Now, William had, he had several sons, and it was a big family. And Charles, which was my grandfather, was one of them.
What he probably would have been the oldest to take the name Charles. Oh, really?
He was not the oldest, so that's why they did not leave the farm to
him.
Charles when they passed away.
They lived in the house that we now call the Craig farm, that David Nelson is farming.
Right.
That's the home where they all lived.
And that's where Charles grew up.
Yes.
Okay, that's an old house.
They used to have. It was a big bunch of children, several. I don't know how. I don't think there was 12, but there was over 8. And they used to have horse races and everything. And one time, I suppose there was corn was growing up, and they couldn't see the intersection, and they crashed the wagon into a neighbor's. And the neighbor got all upset. He was mad, and he got the constable out, and he wanted those Malley boys arrested for wrecking his buggy. Well, so they went to the Malley farm, and they looked for the buggy, and they couldn't find it. Well, the boys had taken the buggy apart because it needed repair too. They had taken it apart and took it up into the hay mile and hid it in all the hay.
Hid the evidence.
So the evidence was hidden.
So maybe it wasn't the Malleys that created the accident.
Well, I think it probably
was.
was.
We know it was.
Yeah. So anyway,
you were going to tell how they lost the farm.
Okay. So then in the 30s, the oldest son, inherited the farm, but he couldn't hold on to it because of the Depression. So he quit farming, and then my grandfather, Charles, who was farming up in the Rio area, he quit up there and moved down. He had a chance to take over the farm. Now, he didn't have enough money to own it, so some people by the name of Cragmeyer, who were Jewish out of New York City, bought the farm, and then my grandfather rented it. Now, this is the same farm that they used to own and that he grew up on.
Okay, and this
had been lost.
This is the Craig farm, and then they also bought the 80 acres too, right?
It was all one.
The 80 was part of it.
Yeah, it was all one.
One side of the tracks was a 80 with a house on it. On the south side was just an 80.
And the Malleys had farmed both those 80s,
yes.
Or okay,
yes.
Yeah.
And then let's see. Then my father married Helen Farrell, who lived in the town of Galesburg. And she came from a large family, about 12 kids.
9.
9, okay, that's right, 9. And so she was a city girl, and she loved the farm, and but it was a lot different than what she was used to. And she lived in town with me after I was born, in town for my first 5 years. And then my grandfather, Charles, had a stroke, and he had to move to town. So then that left the house available on the farm to move into. So my mom and dad and me moved to the farm. And let's see, Helen...
She would have been born.
Helen, my sister, Helen, would have been about 2 years old then. And I can still remember on the farm that they had 2 workhorses, and they would use those horses even yet to cultivate the fields. It was, and we had a farm hand by the name of Emil Johnson, and those 2 horses were his pride and joy. And he would, and then, but all the other equipment at that time, tractors came in. And my father said the best thing that ever happened to the farm was a clutch, because the horses
was so much easier.
every weekend they would have to, they would turn the horses loose. The horses had worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Then they would turn the horses loose on Saturday night. And then Monday morning out in the pasture, they would have to go get the horses
They didn't want to get
rehitch
got.
them again.
And they didn't want to
the
come
horses
back.
knew what was going to happen, and no way. And they had a terrible time catching the horses. And
I was going to say, what was the main source of income at that time when you were a small child? I thought it was the dairy cows.
we had a dairy. We had about I think 15 cows.
Yeah.
That they had to milk
Hand
every
milk.
morning.
By hand.
By hand, right. And then they had chickens.
Sold the eggs.
Sold the eggs. And when first off the chickens left, they got rid of the chickens. And then it came down where they were really persnickety, the health officials, on making sure the milk was right and everything, and the barns had to be clean, and the hay was usually stored above the milking parlor, and then if it wasn't completely sealed up from the milking parlor, it would some of the dirt would sift down
into the milk.
Well,
And
rat
it was-
feces
and it
and
was-
coon
Oh, yeah.
feces.
and it was not being milked by machines. It was milked by hand, and so it just got too much problems with being checked all the time to continue the milking.
Mhm.
So they gave up the milking, and
But kept the old cows and used them
Yes.
for brood stock to have,
Right.
to have
mated them with meat beef bulls.
Mhm.
And
When I married into the family, there was still some of those old milk cows that, the younger ones that were still producing a calf every year. They kept them.
Mhm.
now, Helen Farrell, her grandfather, no, I better not go get into
Yeah.
That's